The Acaia Orbit is a grinder that promises a lot, and I wanted this to be the be-all, end-all home grinder. And it's close. Really, really close. But it's not quite there just yet. This is my full review of the Acaia Orbit. So this is the Acaia Orbit. I personally paid the full price of $1,350 for this grinder, and I've had it for nearly 3 months now. You can find my original unboxing and first impressions video linked in the description down below, as well as up here. Now, this was a fairly highly anticipated grinder. It was designed in collaboration with Weber Workshops, hence the microscope-like similarities to the EG1 in design, but Acaia is very clear to state that they are solely responsible for developing the grinder, technology, manufacturing, selling, and after-sales product support. I've been using this grinder intermittently along with my other grinders in this time frame to get a sense of how it compares. I will also note that I've only been using the stock burrs throughout my time with this grinder, although Acaia does mention you can use SSP burrs with this as well. But at this price range, I think it is fair to just test this grinder with its stock burrs. Now, this grinder also features some unique integrations like the Acaia Lunar Smart Scale with grind by weight technology, which you may be wondering why it has as a single dosing grinder, but that's because they do plan to release a hopper in the future. So with all that being said, let's first talk about some of the features and build quality of the Acaia Orbit. It's a fairly hefty feeling grinder, and it has a relatively nice and compact size. This grinder measures about 27 centimeters deep, 11 centimeters wide, and about 40 centimeters tall, and weighs in around 5.6 kilos. It has a 200-watt brushless DC motor that powers a Mazzer 33M 64mm flat steel burr set with an adjustable 600 to 1500 RPM and stepless grind adjustment. The grinder has a removable power cable that comes out the back of the machine, a little button on the front with a little LED indicator built in, and a little knocker behind the grind chute. And for this premium price point, we also get a premium build quality. The grinder has a space gray color and feels very well built and put together. Anodization here is very smooth with no blemishes or streaks anywhere. One thing I have noticed over time are these little micro scratches here at the base from sliding the dosing cup in and out. The dosing cup included is a standard 58mm one with magnetic stick-on pad underneath, so it aligns under the grind chute. The dial ring mechanism here feels very, very smooth, like a high-quality camera lens, but I'm not a huge fan of the use of stickers here on the adjustment ring, though they are useful to have at least as an indicator. Another thing I don't particularly like is that there's just a little bit of play between the grinder and the base itself, and when you look at it from a head-on perspective, there is sometimes a noticeable off-centered shift. Now, this might be intentional, and if it is, my theory is that it could be to prevent shifting around when the grinder is running. Two other details I'm not a huge fan of are the little spout extender down here and the anti-popcorning cover up here. Both are thin, cheap-feeling pieces of plastic. I wish the spout extender here were metal and used magnets snap on instead. That would have been really nice to see. And I also wish the anti-popcorning cover up here was metal, again, potentially with magnets, which would have been really nice. Speaking of magnets, there are other elements that I wish were carried over from Weber's design on the EG1, particularly, again, that use of magnets and less need for screws, but presumably that would have added a lot to the cost of an already premium grinder, so I won't dock them for that. Now, this grinder also has some smart features. It has grind by weight technology, and in testing it was fairly accurate, and as intended, gets more accurate the more it is used. Now again, this is probably going to be a feature that will become more relevant once a hopper is released, but at the very least, I am glad that the tech is there and that it does work. But, and this is a big but, you do need to have a 2021 Acaia Lunar for it to work, meaning that this $1,350 grinder now becomes a $1,600 grinder with the included Acaia Lunar, plus even more money when you do need to buy a hopper. That's a lot of money. The scale uses these magnetic feet that are adhered onto it, and that allows it to stick to the grinder. The Lunar pairs fairly seamlessly, and both the grinder and Lunar can be controlled with the app, which is again yet another app in Acaia's ecosystem of software that honestly seems to be a bit of a disjointed mess at this point. But the app does work well, and it's pretty cool to see the RPM curves and profiles available to use. So speaking of which, let's now talk about that variable RPM. This one's going to be a little bit tough because I don't necessarily have any tools to measure extraction yield or anything like that, so I'm going to base it off of my subjective taste, as well as what my girlfriend noticed in the taste tests as well. So in doing some comparative A/B blind taste testing, there were two main noticeable differences in a brew set to the lower RPM and a brew set to the higher RPM. And these differences also became more prevalent as the cups cooled down. In the cup with the lower RPM, it had a much lighter bodied feel to it, but with less noticeable sweetness. And in the cup brewed on the higher RPM, it felt a little bit heavier, but also noticeably sweeter, especially as it cooled down. Now my theory here is that the faster grind will have more fines, leading it to it being easier to extract, which is also where you would get that richer and heavier body and added sweetness at the risk of more bitterness. Now I can't make any decisive statements here with one being better than the other, because at the end of the day, it is all subjective preference. Now personally, I enjoyed the higher RPM brews, while my girlfriend preferred the lower RPM brews. So is one setting better than the other? No. But being able to compare and have this ability to use the variable RPM is really interesting, and you can even go as far as to create RPM profiles through the app to control when the RPM changes. But that's a whole new level of nerd that I'm personally not ready for. With regards to espresso, I noticed similar results and also enjoyed a higher RPM shot, though the difference was less noticeable to me. The higher RPM shots felt a little bit heavier bodied and sweeter, while the lower RPM shots felt a little bit lighter and a little bit more acidic. And all of these tests were run using beans from the sponsor of today's video, Mirror Coffee Roasters. Based out of Bellingham, Washington, Mirror Coffee Roasters not only roasts some delicious greens to perfection, but also strives to make a positive impact in the coffee supply chain. I've been enjoying some great roasts from their latest project with beans from Guatemala and Ethiopia and a variety of processing methods from washed to natural. I've been enjoying these beans so much so that I've been bringing them to share at work. Not only brewing them here at home for both filter and espresso, but even on the go. Not only do they produce great beans, but Mark and Sergey of Mirror Coffee Roasters also have a great podcast that you should definitely give a listen. And be sure to go and check them out with the link in the description down below. So once again, thanks to Mirror Coffee Roasters for sponsoring this video. Now, this grinder, it would be best to compare to one like the Lagome P64 in terms of price and feature set, which unfortunately I don't have, nor have I ever really used. So in terms of comparison, I'm going to be comparing this to grinders I do have, like the Fellow Ode Gen 2, the DF83, and the Malkonig X54. Not exactly an apples to apples test, but hopefully helpful nonetheless. Compared to the Fellow Ode, I personally enjoyed using the Orbit for more manual filter brews, like the Aurea and the V60, but when it came to the automatic Mocha Master, for some reason, I just enjoyed using the Fellow Ode Gen 2 a little bit more. For some reason, the brews I was getting on the Mocha Master with the Ode just felt a little bit cleaner and a little bit more well-balanced. And I think a large part of why the Orbit wins on manual brews is in large part due to that variable RPM that can be tweaked to preference. Now, when it comes to espresso, I've generally still preferred a more traditional shot profile that I feel like I can more easily achieve with something like the DF83. Now that being said, it's still pretty great for espresso, especially for more developed roasts. The shot came out rich and full-bodied, and while it's not super high clarity, it's definitely not on the muddier side as well, if that makes any sense. Performance here is excellent, and compared to some other 64mm bird grinders I've tried for espresso, like the DF64 and 64P, the Orbit has a much smoother workflow and a tastier result with a lot less fuss. I'd say overall the Orbit's shots were higher bodied and produced greater clarity to the DF64, but again, subjective thoughts speaking. So now to quickly go over some thoughts about workflow. It's pretty nice, it's easy to use, and it's fairly clean. But for some odd reason, even for a grinder of this tier, it's hard to truly beat the simple and clean workflow of the Niche Zero. This grinder just needs RDT. Without it, chaffing can get very messy very quickly, though I have noticed some slight improvement using the little included spout extender, which only works without the Acaia Lunar in place. With the Lunar in place, the dosing cup is too large to work with the spout extender. With RDT, the grinder's retention is very little, if any at all. But without RDT, not only will you need to be using the included knocker many times, but you will also need to tap on your table to see if you can actually get even more grinds to fall out from the chute, which is kind of annoying. I don't know why this is, but I will say that RDT is going to be a must with this grinder. Apart from that, workflow is smooth. The RPM changing is nice, and it can also be done with the button on the front, and the grinder itself just looks awesome, like, again, a microscope. So, to conclude, this is a cool grinder. It has a lot of features that I'm sure can be more beneficial with the release of the hopper and follows a very minimal and modern design aesthetic. However, at a price of $1,350 with a $250 scale and presumably another pricey hopper to get the most out of this grinder, it is going to be hard to justify. Up until now, my favorite grinder is still going to be the DF83. And that's not to say that this grinder is bad by any means, my subjective preferences just favor the larger flat burrs. This is a very fun grinder, and I think it offers more capability than something like the P64 with the RPM profiling availability and the smart integrations with the Acaia Lunar. So, all that being said, it's a fun grinder, it's cool to nerd out with, and it has a great aesthetic. It's by far my favorite looking grinder I've ever used. So who is this for? I think this grinder is for a niche audience with its high price point, but also for the desire to nerd out with the profiling features. It's for someone that's ready to spend more money than something like a Niche Zero, but not quite at the level of an EG1 just yet. It's certainly a do-it-all grinder for both filter and espresso with no issues. But personally, this grinder isn't for me. It's fun, performs well, but personally I just can't justify the high price point given my lack of interest in truly testing out that RPM profiling capability. And so for that reason, I'm out. So those are my thoughts on the Acaia Orbit. I hope this video was helpful and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to drop a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are about this grinder. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Also, shout out to my barber Dave, who watches the channel, for the great new haircut.